Nazario is an award-winning journalist whose stories have tackled some of this country's most intractable problems: hunger, drug addiction, immigration, and have won some of the most prestigious journalism and book awards. A fluent Spanish speaker of Jewish ancestry, whose personal history includes living in Argentina during the so-called Dirty War, Nazario spent 20 years reporting and writing about social issues for US newspapers. She is best known for Enrique's journey, her story of an Honduran boy's struggle to find his mother in the US. Published as a series in the Los Angeles Times, Enrique's journey won the Pulitzer Prize for feature writing in 2003. It was turned into a book by Random House that became a national bestseller and is now required reading at hundreds of high schools and colleges across the country, including Wingate University. When a national crisis erupted in 2014 over the detention of unaccompanied immigrant children at the border, Nazario returned to Honduras to report an article that was published in the New York Times in July. In her piece, she detailed the violence causing the exodus and argued that it is a refugee crisis, not an immigration crisis. After the article was published, she addressed the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations and gave many interviews to national media, including The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, NBC's Meet the Press, Anderson Cooper's 360, and Al Punto's with Jorge Ramos. She then spent months making speeches on the issue and recruiting attorneys to provide pro bono representation to unaccompanied minors. Her humanitarian efforts led to her selection as the 2015 Don and Arvon Fraser Human Rights Award recipient by the Advocates for Human Rights. She was also named a 2015 Champion of Children by First Focus and a 2015 Golden Door Award winner by HIAS Pennsylvania. Nazario, who grew up in Kansas and in Argentina, has written exclusively from Latin America about Latinos in the United States. She has been named among the most influential Latinos by Hispanic Business Magazine and a trendsetter by Hispanic Magazine. She is a graduate of Williams College and has a master's degree in Latin American Studies from the University of California at Berkeley. She has an honorary doctorate from Mount St. Mary's College and Whittier College. She began her career at the Wall Street Journal and later joined the Los Angeles Times. She is now at work on her second book. Enrique's journey won more than a dozen awards, among them the Pulitzer Prize for feature writing, the George Polk Award for International Reporting, the Grand Prize of the Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Award, and the National Association of Hispanic Journalists Guillermo Martinez Marquez Award for Overall Excellence. In 1998, Ms. Nazario was a Pulitzer Prize finalist for a series on children of drug-addicted parents. And in 1994, she won a George Polk Award for local reporting for a series about hunger among school children in California. She serves on the advisory boards of the University of North Texas Mayborn Literary Nonfiction Writers Conference and of Catch the Next, a nonprofit working to double the number of Latinos enrolling in college. She is also on the board of Kids in Need of Defense, a nonprofit launched by Microsoft and Angelina Jolie to provide pro bono attorneys to unaccompanied immigrant children. Please join me in welcoming Sonia Nazario to Wingate University.
Thank you, Marissa, for that kind introduction. Thank you to Wingate for inviting me here to speak about this issue. It's a very important issue, and it's a local issue that I describe in my book, because the boy and the journey that he makes, he ends up not that far from here in North Carolina with his mother. And so it's a story of migrating to North Carolina. And North Carolina has seen, really is among the top 10 states now in undocumented immigrants, risen from just 77,000 in 1990 to about 350,000 today, almost 4% of the population. So that's about the national average, and about 8% K through 12 of students are either undocumented or have an undocumented parent. This has caused a lot of controversy here and a lot of discussion, and so I'm hoping we can further that some in the Q&A after my remarks. And I would hate to try to boil this issue down to 800 words, so congratulations to the three winners. I'm in awe of you all. So, as a child of immigrants, folks who are willing to leave everything that they know and love to uproot and fling themselves into the unknown. This is a very hard thing to do. Imagine being plucked out of North Carolina and dropped in India, Afghanistan, somewhere where you didn't know anyone, didn't speak the language. Tough thing to do. So I thought, as the children of immigrants, I knew something about adversity and grit and determination. It was here in my very DNA. My father's family fled Christian persecution many decades ago in Syria to go to Argentina. My father was actually born in Argentina. My mother's Jewish family, here they are, they fled Poland before World War II to go to Argentina. Those who didn't were killed in Auschwitz. And as adults, my two parents left Argentina, where they had both grown up, for opportunity in the United States. This was the first day that my father arrived to the United States, and he was coming as a biochemist to do early genetic mapping. I faced a whole slew of obstacles growing up that really, it just fueled that toughness that I already had in my genes. As a kid, I mostly grew up in Kansas, and I admitted this before the largest gathering of English teachers recently, thousands of them. I did not like studying or reading anything. What I preferred to do was this. I loved to ride my horse, Blanca, jump, barrel race, and I loved coming home just reeking of manure because it really got my older sister's goat. She was, my father favored that sister by a mile. She was the straight-A student, goody two-shoes, very well behaved, and I was apparently the exact opposite of that. My father would call me openly to my face the dumb jock in the family. So I had this really powerful motivator. I was going to prove him wrong about me. Then my father died suddenly of a heart attack. I was just 13 years old when he died, and my mother decided when that happened to take us all back to live in Argentina. She did not particularly like the United States. This comes as a shock to many college students because we're taught, America is the greatest nation on earth and everyone wants to live here. She would say things like, many immigrants, by the way, don't feel that way. She would say things like, los vecinos son tan fríos, the neighbors are so cold, they don't even know each other here. It had a little to do with her inability to speak English very well, but she decided to take us all back to live in Argentina. Her timing was just terrible. It was the beginning of the so-called dirty war. The military was just about to take power, and they would disappear, that's a euphemism for kill, about 30,000 people in the coming few years. When I was 14 and 15, I lived in fear every day. The military would roam the streets in unmarked cars and pluck people up. And it didn't take much to get targeted. You could have a beard. All you teachers and professors, you were all commies, and they certainly didn't like anyone who was trying to advocate for a more just society. I always walked to school with my best friend, because if one of us got snatched, hopefully the other one could run and tell our parents what had just happened. A 17-year-old, very close family member of mine, she was picked up, tortured for a month, held in jail in very hard conditions for nearly a year. And as the only American in my family, I was lobbying congressional leaders in Kansas to try and save her life. They killed a good friend of mine. He was just 16 years old. They broke every bone in his face. I remember one day, I was walking down the streets of Buenos Aires with my mother. Just down the block from where we lived, I saw this pool of blood on the sidewalk. And I asked my mom, what happened? And she said that the military had killed 2 journalists. Why? I asked her, and she said, well, those journalists were trying to tell the truth about what's going on here. I quickly understood that the military, in part, they were able to get away with what they were doing because people didn't really understand the magnitude of what was happening all around them. I understood that they were willing to kill a whole lot of people to keep that society ignorant. And I understood clearly you cannot have a strong democracy, whether it's there or here, and I fear what's happening to our press in this country, without a really strong, vibrant press that's willing to hold people in power accountable for what they are doing. I saw the power of words that day, the power of storytelling. I decided, staring at that pool of blood, and you should know my nickname from the age of 3 has been La Granuja, the troublemaker. I like to stir the pot. I decided, staring at that I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a truth teller someday. You might have made a different decision. We returned to the U.S. not long after that, and while, I had so many other obstacles to overcome to become that storyteller, I thought, I'm facing them head on with con ganas, as we like to say, with determination. My father's death plunged our family from we were middle class, now we were working poor. Mom had never gone beyond high school, 4 kids to raise, so she got a job as a seamstress, minimum wage cook. And I got a job at 15 bussing tables to help her pay the bills. I was a good student in my high school in Kansas, but I think because I was the only one back then who looked like this, no counselor even suggested that Sonia should probably go on to college. Luckily, my boyfriend did, and I ended up following him to Williams College, which is often ranked #1 in U.S. News as the top liberal arts school in the U.S. When I got there, some of you may feel this way now, I felt completely overwhelmed. I had gone to a not very good high school. I had never written a paper longer than 3 pages, and you could count on my 2 paws the number of books I had ever cracked open and attempted to read to the end. Well, these kids, they had all gone to the best prep schools in the land, Andover, Exeter. They had been writing papers, seemed to me, since they were in diapers. It felt like I had landed on some alien planet of preppies. I mean, they had names like Muffy and Buffy, like who calls their children that? And at least half of them seemed directly descended from the Mayflower. I got grants, I worked, and I was maybe one of 5 Latinos on the whole campus. And I was drowning. I was getting C-, which is dangerously close to flunking. But at some point, you know what? That determination kicked in, and I realized these students, they're no smarter than I am. They're just way more prepared. Sonia, you need to buck up and work harder and find mentors here who can help you catch up to where these other kids are at. I ended up graduating with honors and some pretty funky glasses by today's standards, and going back to give the convocation just a few years ago. At 21, I was the youngest reporter, I'm told, hired by Wall Street Journal, but I was determined to tell stories that I thought would matter, and I didn't think business stories were part of that. I focused on social issues, social justice issues, and people, honestly, that I feel don't get enough ink in this country. Women, children, the poor, and yes, Latinos. I became an expert in what's called fly-on-the-wall reporting. What I love doing I cannot stand sitting in an office and interviewing people on a telephone all day long. I'd rather not be a journalist. But what I love doing is just dropping myself in the middle of the action that I am trying to describe. I love hanging out in riot zones, in crack houses, dangerous, tough places. I always view my goal as I want to grab my reader by the throat and take them on a ride inside these worlds that you might not spend a lot of time in otherwise, you might not otherwise see. I believe that there's an immediacy. There is a power if I can take my reader, you, and put you right in the middle of the action. I have a lot of deficits. I'm bad at a lot of stuff, and I've been away from my husband for 3 weeks, and at any given night he will list some of my deficits when we talk on the telephone. But I thought I was the queen of overcoming obstacles. I was good at that. That is until I had a conversation one morning with this woman, Carmen. And Carmen I actually saw her in Iowa the other day, but she used to clean my house in Los Angeles, where I live, a couple of times a month. And I remember one morning we were standing in my kitchen, and I asked Carmen, "Are you thinking about having any more children?" She sometimes brought her young son when she cleaned, and I thought this was her only child. She was normally this incredibly happy, chatty woman. But when I popped that question, Carmen went silent and started just sobbing in my kitchen. And she explained that she had left 4 children behind in Guatemala I knew nothing about. She said, "Sonia, I'm a single mother. My husband went off with some other woman, and most days I could feed my children breakfast and maybe lunch, but at night, I had nothing to give them." And she showed me in my kitchen, I still remember how she would gently coax her kids to roll over in bed at night. And she would say to them, "Sleep face down so your stomach doesn't growl so much." She had left these kids with their grandma in Guatemala, and she had come north to work in Los Angeles. And she told me she hadn't seen her children in 12 years. Can you imagine that with your own children, your own parents? Her youngest was a year old, still breastfeeding when she walked away. I stood in my kitchen stunned. I could not comprehend. How does a mother leave and go 2,000 miles north? And honestly, Carmen had no inkling when or if she was going to see her children again. What I was seeing right there in my kitchen, and that you might have seen in your kitchen, was the quiet transformation of the face of migrants coming to this country. I thought migrants are overwhelmingly men, but today 51% of those coming here unlawfully, of the nearly 12 million here, are actually women and children, and the same thing has happened around the world. Millions of single mothers have come here in recent decades from Mexico, from Central America, and they've left children behind. In Los Angeles, where I live, 4 out of every 5 live-in nannies still has a child left behind in their home country. These women, like this woman, are part of the largest wave of immigration in our nation's history. One reason this is so contentious now in North Carolina and elsewhere is that between 1990 and 2010, 27 million folks came here legally and not, numerically more than at any other time in our history. 1 million folks come here every year legally or become permanent residents. That's a lot. And despite our struggling economy, 200,000 are coming here without permission every year. And yeah, that is down, by the way, more than 3/4 from the high we were seeing in 2007, prior to the recession. If you look across our nation's public schools, 1 in 4 children now is either an immigrant or child of an immigrant, and that will rise to 30% in just a few years. It is the fastest growing group of kids in the United States. These women told me, "Sonia, I take care of other people's children, and I feed them, and I love that boy that I take care of. But I wasn't there to see my own son take those first steps, to hear my daughter's first words. I couldn't be there on her birthday or on Christmas morning. But as I started to interview these women in North Carolina and elsewhere, all of them told me the same story. They said, the only way I could walk away that day from them, I gave them a promise. I said, mijo, I swear, I'm gonna be back. This is gonna be 1-2 years, no more. What they didn't realize is life here is a little tougher than advertised. I think this is because when people here phone home to their relatives, out of pride, they tend to puff up all the good stuff. I make $8 an hour. I have a car. No one in my pueblito, my town, has a car. What they don't say is I'm working 2 jobs. I'm stuffed into an apartment with 3 other families, a converted garage. I'm struggling to pay my bills here in North Carolina, send $100 home to my children in Central America a month, and I have to save $10,000 to put in the smuggler's hand to bring each of my children north. So I found this is never 1 or 2 years. These separations are typically 5 and 10 years, sometimes more. And these kids get desperate to be with their mamas again. So they get this idea, all right, she's not coming back or sending for me. I am going to go and find her. When I started looking at this phenomenon 15 years ago, we all heard about it 15 months ago with this surge of kids at our border. This is nothing new. What I saw was a small army of kids coming north every year from Mexico, Central America. They were coming alone with no mother or father with them, and they were entering the United States unlawfully. 48,000 kids in 2000. Back then, they were coming to work. They were fleeing abusive families in countries that really don't have foster care, functioning child welfare systems. And most of them were coming to reunify with a mom, a dad, who had left them behind years before. And so as some of you know, I wrote about this army of children, and I was in Mexico just 5 weeks ago, reporting another piece for the New York Times, and I saw these children migrating then. I wrote about this army of kids through the true story of one boy, Enrique. His mama leaves him when he's just 5 years old in Honduras. She walks away. She comes to work in California. And this was his kindergarten mugshot shortly after she left him. He's devastated by her poof. His mom is suddenly disappeared. And he would beg his paternal grandma, ¿Cuándo vuelve? Is she coming back for me or not? When is she coming? Enrique told me that when he was 11 and 12 years old, on Christmas morning, he would plant himself at the door of his grandma's wooden shack. And he would pray to God for just one present. Just bring my mother back to me as my present. After 11 years, and this is what he looked like, he set off to go and find her. And all he and most of these kids have on them are this tiny scrap of paper with his mother's phone number penned on it. Her phone number in Cary, North Carolina. It was amazing to me on these migrant routes. These kids would hide that slip of paper. I'd see them in the sole of their shoe, the waistband of their jeans. They would wrap it in plastic so when it rained or hailed, hopefully that precious number, or they cross rivers, that precious number wouldn't smudge. And he's got his scrap of paper and he's virtually penniless, so he goes the only way he can through Mexico, gripping on to the tops and sides of these freight trains that travel up the length of the country. I actually heard about children as young as seven, making this journey alone. I heard a professor here say, I would not let my child at 8 or any age around there go to the grocery store alone. And yet I would travel with this boy who was 12 years old, Dennis. And with his Tweety Bird t-shirt on, his mama left him when he was 1 in Honduras, and at 12, he would cross 4 countries by himself and actually reach her in San Diego, California. From the moment these kids crossed the Suchiate River that divides Guatemala from Mexico, They are hunted like animals all the way as they travel up Mexico by people who are trying to rob them, rape them, beat them, and deport them. Most children, they don't make it to our border. Something bad happens to them in Mexico. There are a lot of possibilities, and they end up deported, defeated back in their home countries. Mexico deported 107,000 Central Americans last year, and way too many of them, they're killed along the way. They are torn apart by the train wheels as they travel north. They face bandits alongside the rails. The immigration authorities stop the train, and you've got to elude those agents, run around those checkpoints, and get on the train as it's moving on the other side. 3 to 5 swarms of bandits waiting to rob, rape you, and sometimes kill you. They face a dozen different police agencies, corrupt cops I documented that would stop the train. This boy's trying to avoid some of those cops. Stop the train, rob your hat, belt, shoes, any coins they find on you, rape the girls sometimes, deport you across the southern border. They face gangsters who control the train tops. A lot of these gangsters were deported by the United States. They were permanent residents from Central America, and in '96 we toughened laws towards permanent residents who had committed DUIs, drug offenses, and started deporting them. We've deported more than 300,000 criminal gangsters, and in Central America, the cops don't treat you real well if you have a lot of tattoos, so they started migrating north, and they found a good business, rolling criminal enterprise atop these trains. And I would watch them. I'd see 10 or 20 on top of every car. They would go from car to car, surround a group of migrants on top of these trains and say, your money or your life, and strip you of your clothes, look for any coins. Sometimes, because they're hopped up on crack or crazy, they would just throw you down to those churning wheels below. And they face the train, which they call La Bestia, the beast. The Central Americans cannot cross Mexico legally, so they have to get on and off these trains, not at the train stations, but as they're moving. And take my word for it, I've done this. This is a lot tougher than it looks because the rail beds slant at 45 degrees. They're made up of big rocks, the rail beds. For the kids, the first rung of the ladder would come at their waist even higher if that train was banking away from them. So I'd watch them try to pull themselves up. You have to elude those immigration agents also. Last summer, Enrique's cousin was coming north. He said there were 1,500 people on one train. I was just trying to find one piece of metal to grab onto. And unfortunately, way too many don't do this successfully. I spent time in a shelter in southern Mexico that's just for migrants mutilated by trains. And it's hard for me to express what it's like to walk in. You see rooms filled with people who have lost legs and feet, like Fausto, and like this 14-year-old, the leg, half of his leg and the toes on his other foot to that freight train. The worst part of this journey, much worse than the US-Mexico border that is hard to cross. About 400 people a year die crossing, just walking into the United States, is Mexico, especially the southernmost state of Chiapas. These kids would tell me when they started, ahora nos enfrentamos a la bestia. Now we face the beast. Enrique faces the worst. He's on top of this train, pitch dark, middle of the night. 6 guys creep up the ladders, throw him face down, and they just start beating his face with a wooden club. They shatter his teeth, strip off his clothes, no money. They beat him harder. One of these thugs starts to strangle Enrique with a bit of his clothes, and he tries to pull this away from his throat and buffer the blows coming right at his face. And he hears one of these thugs yell out, "Just throw him off the train." And Enrique's thinking in his mind, I'm gonna die, and my mother in North Carolina, she'll have no idea what just happened to me. Suddenly the train jostles, the noose loosens, he's able to fling himself off. It's going 40 miles an hour. And when he finally comes to, All they've left him are his underwear. He's covered in blood. His eyes are filled with blood. And yet he steels himself to try to make that journey for an 8th time, one more time. I would tell Enrique's story by doing it myself. I met him, he was all the way up in Nuevo Laredo, right across from Laredo, Texas, and I would spend a couple of weeks with him there, watching, as a journalist, I'm tagging along, I'm watching his misery play out so I can convey it as graphically as I possibly can to my readers. He told me everywhere he had been on those 8 attempts, and I went back to his grandma's house and I did this journey step by step exactly as he had just a few weeks before. 3 months, 1,600 miles, and I would travel on top of 7 freight trains up the length of Mexico. And then, because apparently once was not enough for me, I would do it a second time, 3 more months. I took a lot of precautions. I'm not completely nuts. I got a letter from the President of Mexico saying, be nice to her, and that kept me out of jail 3 times along the way. It turned out the precautions were not nearly enough. No migrant mentioned to me, this is me on the train. In the south of Mexico, it's like a jungle. In the north, it's very desert-like. But in the south, there are these branches that envelop the tops of the trains. And this was my first train ride, and it's pitch dark. And the migrants on top of the train, there were about 100, start yelling back this warning, Rama. I could not hear what the heck they were saying. And you can see the branches around the train. I was holding on for dear life because the train bucks violently from side to side. I didn't hear a warning, and this huge branch, it smacked me right in the middle of my face. It sent me sprawling back, almost off this car. I grabbed onto the rail on the top side. It was a much bigger branch than this, and was able to pull on the top side of the car, and I pulled myself back up on top. When this train finally stopped the next day, 2 boys on the car behind mine said another boy swiped off by the very same branch, and they said he's probably dead because when these trains move forward, they produce this sucking wind under the wheels, so it actually pulls you into the wheels as you fall down off that car. I was having a nightmare every night. When I went back home to LA, this gangster, he was running after me on top of the train. He was trying to rape me, and that's because a guy did try to grab me. I was able, luckily, to get away from him. And I had to go into therapy for about 6 months to make that nightmare finally stop. I felt tense and filthy and in fear of being robbed, beaten, or raped every day on that train. In the south, it was so hot on this train, the metal would burn my hands. And in the north, it was so cold. Children froze to death, and I'd watch them do all sorts of crazy things around me, build fires on top of trains to try and not freeze to death. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you told yourself, man, I'm at my breaking point. I cannot take another moment of this. That's how I felt on this train. But eventually, this sucker stopped, and I'd get off, and I'd pull out some pesos and buy some tacos and sleep in a warm motel bed. You know, I knew I had been through 1% of what these children go through who had none of those advantages. The hell of the journey in southern Mexico, honestly, it just crushed my faith in human beings, what I saw there. But then these kind people materialized out of nowhere who restored my faith in human beings. In Veracruz, where there's a curve in the tracks, south central Mexico, where this train had to slow down because there's a curve or for some other reason. When people in these little villages would hear the whistle of the train, I would see 10, 30 people run out of these little huts with bundles of food in their arms. I was actually with this woman about 5 weeks ago. They'd all start waving and smiling and shouting out to these migrants on top of the train. They threw bread. They threw tortillas. They threw whatever fruit was in season. When I was on top of the car, they were pummeling me with these large branches of bananas and rolls of crackers. If they didn't have that, well, then they'd throw tap water. And if they didn't even have that, I'd watch them line up next to the tracks, put their hands together, and they'd say a silent prayer for these migrants as they pass by on top of the train. I was so moved by this spectacle because, you know, that woman makes $1 a day. She could barely feed her children, but she was giving a little of what she had to total strangers from other lands. And all of these folks were doing this. We heard the Pope talking about this the other day. They told me, Sonia, this is the Christian thing to do. It's the right thing to do. I know I might have not read the 92 references to the stranger in the Old Testament, but I know this is what Jesus would do if he were right here standing in my shoes. People like Maria helped, gave. Maria, I had real problems with her when we started my interview because I'm this tough, investigative reporter, give me the facts. Well, at the beginning of our interview, I asked Maria, how old are you? And she said, I'm 132 years old. And I'm like, oh no. Okay, can I believe anything this woman tells me? She said that during the Mexican Revolution in 1910, she was so hungry, she would eat the bark of the plantain tree in her front yard. Her hands looked like this. They were gnarled with age. But she'd force them to make little bags with tortillas, beans, whatever she had in this hut. And when she heard that whistle, she would foist these all on her 70-year-old daughter. And then Soledad would go racing down that rocky slope, and she would heave all these bags up. You can see the train tracks to the waiting hands of the migrants on top of the train. I'll always remember what she told me. If I have one tortilla, well, I'll give half away. I know God will bring me more. I saw people like Francisca, very poor, sweater full of holes, missing all her front teeth. That's why she's not smiling for my photograph. She would give food 4 times a day. That's her whole hut. She's managed to squish 3 beds into this one room, and every night she and her 2 children sleep on 1.5 beds. Every night she allows 3 migrants, strangers to her that morning, to sleep on the other 1.5 beds. I've never seen people, I know we're here in the Bible Belt, but I've never seen people live their faith like I saw in Mexico. Enrique makes 8 attempts over 122 days and 12,000 miles. Children have long gone on this modern day odyssey, and for me, for years, I felt that it was enough to educate people about, the latest wrinkle in this long-running immigration saga in our nation. But recently, I have felt compelled to get off of the sidelines, to say more about this issue. I have become, we journalists it's beaten into us that we should not express political opinions, we should not take a position on things, we should be objective, right? It's part of our ethics. I have become what used to be a very dirty word for me. I've become an advocate. Well, what pushed me over the line that we journalists are taught is strictly verboten. It's off limits. I saw that last year, 69,000 unaccompanied immigrant children were caught coming into the United States illegally, and that's a 10-fold increase over just 4 years before. I knew this journey was way more dangerous than when I had made it and Enrique had. The Zetas, the most bloodthirsty narco cartel now in Mexico, they have allied with the gangs to control those train tops, and they pay gangsters a $100 bounty for every migrant that they kidnap. They are kidnapping 20,000 Central Americans a year in Mexico. These are some of the faces of the disappeared. And they prefer to snatch children because they use that little scrap of paper they carry to demand ransom from parents here in North Carolina, $3 to $5 grand. And if you don't pay when they grab your child, they will kill your child. It involves a knife, and I won't describe how they do it. Surveys show 60% of girls are raped now crossing Mexico, and Mexican morgues, they're receiving 4,000 unidentified bodies a year, many presumed to be immigrants. So I sat there asking myself, why would any child do this now? And for God's sake, why would any parent allow them to do this? Well, the answer is that today, it's actually safer to embark on this journey than to stay in places like El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. Migrant children interviewed by the United Nations said recently that they had been threatened once, 3 times in these home countries. And they felt like, I know I'm gonna die if I stay in these places. 58% told the UN, nearly 6 in 10, the primary reason for leaving today is violence in my home country. And by the way, that 58% is up from just 13% in 2006. The UN said that these children likely merit international protection by your government and my government, the United States government. In the past decade, U.S. taxpayers, that's you and me, we've shelled out $8 billion to disrupt the flow of cocaine traveling from Latin America, Venezuela, and Colombia. Those red lines are drug flights, bringing us drugs to the United States. We're the largest consumer of illegal drugs on earth. We consume 1 in 4 illegal drugs on earth. What did the narcos do? The top map is 2007. They used to bring those flights of drugs to the Caribbean and then continue on to the United States. Well, this is 2011. What do they do with all that pressure? They just moved the planes to the left, and they're landing 4 out of 5 flights in Honduras, a country which in recent years has had the #1 homicide rate in the world among countries not at war, second only in kill rate to Syria, which we know has had a raging civil war for many years. When I went back to Honduras, I lived in Enrique's house for 8 days about 15 months ago to report another piece for the New York Times. I was just blown away by the violence that kids now faced in his neighborhood. They were being kidnapped, beheaded, skinned alive. The gangs and the narco cartels that these gangs are often now reporting to were forcibly conscripting young children, much like recruiting them, much like child soldiers are recruited in Sudan, to serve as lookouts for them, to extort money from local businesses, to sell drugs in the neighborhood, and yes, to kill people as later on as sicarios. We know there's a movie out by that name right now. Boys like Christian told me, and this kid is 11 years old in Enrique's neighborhood. He's in the 6th grade. And he told me he knew the consequences to saying no thank you to the narcos who were trying to pressure him to use crack as he came out of the elementary school that the gangs and narcos now control in Enrique's neighborhood. They wanted him to use crack, get hooked, and start working for him. 3 children he knew who had said no in 6 months had been murdered, including an 11-year-old girl clubbed over the head, raped. They cut a hole in her throat, stuffed her panties in it, and left her broken body in the ravine across the street from where he lived. He told me, I'm getting out this year, even if it means riding on top of that train. The kids fleeing, they're getting younger. Half of those caught in Mexico, 11 and younger, more are girls. And Milagro in Enrique's neighborhood explained why. She was told by the head of the gangs, you're going to be my girlfriend, or I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill your whole family here in Honduras. I'm going to exterminate them all. And as she told me, it's better to leave than to have them kill me right here in Honduras. Today's migrants, many of them, are a word we're hearing a lot with Syrians, right? They're refugees. They are fleeing persecution, fleeing for their lives, and they have a government in parts of Honduras that cannot or will not protect them. There are swaths of these places that are controlled by the gangs and the narcos, not by the government. Well, you know, our congressional leaders didn't exactly see it this way 15 months ago when this was all at the top of the headlines. They talked about this horde of criminal 6-year-olds at our border, all infested with Ebola. They wanted to bring Ebola to all of us. They should all be sent back. And instead of welcoming refugees, by the way, we have actually signed protocols saying that we will do this as a government, and we demand that other countries around the world do this, like the countries around Syria have taken in more than 4 million refugees. Our president went in the opposite direction. He said, I'm sending them all back. And he's tried. Last year, he pushed to roll back a 2008 law that requires that Central American kids, they get a full and fair hearing before an immigration judge to try to prove that they're refugees, that they deserve asylum in the United States. He couldn't convince Congress to roll back that law, so he asked them to put their cases at the front of the immigration dockets and ram the cases through quickly. So quickly that some judges in Texas, for example, will give you a week to show up with a fully developed asylum claim, which most lawyers will tell you takes a year minimally to develop a fully developed asylum case. After all the traumas that I've described that these children have endured, we inflict one more on them, the U.S. Judicial System. We've all heard that if you're a murderer in the United States, or accused of being one, if you can't afford a lawyer, you're going to have a public defender assigned to you. You're not going to court without a lawyer by your side. But not if you are an immigrant, even a child. And so imagine what I saw in LA Immigration Court. There was this 7-year-old boy. He's shaking with fear standing before that judge. He's being asked to present a complex legal asylum claim before this court. I've seen 3-year-olds being asked to do this. 7 in 10 of these children, they can't afford a lawyer, so they're going it alone in court. It is terrifying for them. I've seen children, toddlers, pee in their pants, clutch teddy bears, standing in court. Anything they say can send them hurtling back to this danger that they have just fled. We actually know, I hear in North Carolina and pretty much everywhere, Sonia, what part of illegal don't you understand? Well, you know, we actually know that at least half of these kids qualify to stay in this country legally. They're entitled to that. But without a lawyer, they're doomed. 1 in 10 win their cases. If you have a lawyer who can spell out your story, articulate your legal case, 7 in 10 of these children win their cases. And finally, and this is what set my hair on fire most recently and got me back to Mexico reporting for the New York Times 5 weeks ago, and the piece came out a couple of weeks ago on the cover of the Sunday Review. This administration has asked Mexico to keep these kids from arriving at our border, and we have trained, equipped, and actually paid Mexico tens of millions of dollars this year to do that. Mexico, that great champion of immigrants, supposedly, they deported 20,000 Central American children last year. That's 4 times what they did just 2 years before. Mexico is actually detaining and deporting more Central Americans now than the United States. This surge of kids, it's not gone away. I know it's not in our headlines anymore. Nearly as many people are fleeing these countries in Central America. It's just that the tide is being turned away in Mexico, a country where, by the way, it's virtually impossible for a kid to apply, make an asylum claim. So what are the consequences of our policies? Well, it's the 14-year-old boy, Gredis, who was caught in Mexico. He was fleeing gangster threats. He was deported back, and within 24 hours of crossing the threshold back into his home, Those gangsters had beaten down his front door, and they had put 2 bullets in his brain. 14-year-old boy. This administration has proposed $90 million to do more of this in the coming year. You know, to be clear, and this is important, I don't think that all migration is good. I'm a very bad Latina in that sense. Far from it. I believe that there are winners and there are losers in terms of what has really been an unprecedented influx to this country in the last couple of decades. I think we can and should have a full-throated debate about these pluses and minuses, especially when it comes to economic migrants, who I see as different from refugees. Those are folks who are coming here primarily for a better life. Unlike many, I see this issue as one with many shades of gray. There are huge benefits to this influx. Anyone who tells you otherwise is simply not telling the truth. The migrants do a lot of jobs Americans simply don't want to do. I was in Morganton, and I know that Tyson is right around here, so there's a lot of chicken poultry plants around here, and I don't know if you've spent time on a kill floor of a meat packing plant, but these are pretty unpleasant places to work, and most Americans do not want to gut a chicken all day long, or pluck the feathers off of them, or cut them up in very cold environments where often they don't even let you go to the bathroom in 4 or 5 hours to not stop the production line for $8 or $9 an hour. Most Americans simply don't want to do that and some other jobs. And migrants will do those jobs. Migrants, virtually every economist will tell you, help spur our $16 trillion economy. And that's important right now. They also say that 5% of all goods and services all of us buy are cheaper because of immigrant labor. That means your food is cheaper, your clothing are cheaper. A lot of goods and services you get are cheaper because of immigrant labor. I think migrants prevent a lot of businesses from shutting down altogether or outsourcing more jobs. If those poultry producers had to pay $20 an hour to get an all-American workforce, could we afford chickens as consumers? Or we couldn't, and those producers would say, instead, we're going to shut this down, we're going to import chickens from China, from Argentina, from Brazil. All the economic activity of Tyson and those people who work there and spend their bucks in this community would just go away. But there are losers, and from my perspective, the bad part is that those are the most socially disadvantaged in this country, the 1 in 14 Americans who have not gotten a high school degree, who are being forced to compete with immigrants in certain industries, who have seen their wages drop by nearly 7% over 20 years because of that competition. Those are mostly African Americans and previous waves of Latino immigrants. 1 in 7 construction workers, 1 in 4 roofers are here unlawfully. I'd argue Americans will do those jobs if they're paid a living wage to do so. The other big losers, and no one talks about this, are migrants themselves. It's true, if you come here as a mom and leave your kid behind, you will send money, and they will eat, and they will study, and that's huge. But it's equally true, you leave your kid for 10 years, they will resent and walk up to the line of hating you for it. They don't understand it. They say to me to a one, I would have rather had my mama by my side in Honduras than had her in North Carolina sending the Nike shoes, soccer ball, even the money to be able to eat. They're tough on their moms, and I had a boy in a high school in LA say to his mother's face, even a dog doesn't leave its litter. And these mothers lose the most precious thing, which is the love of their children. I think instead of the same 3 tired approaches proffered by the left and by the right for the last few decades, that honestly, they're the same 3 elements that are part of comprehensive immigration reform now. We need to stem this exodus at its source, and so more migrants don't feel like they have to flee their homelands, where honestly, most of them would rather live. We've tried 3 solutions in the past that our political leaders swore would stem this flow. We've tried border enforcement on steroids. We spend $18 billion in taxpayer money a year now at this. Hired a lot of Border Patrol agents, and we've deported a whole lot of folks in recent years, 400,000 a year. Despite all this, 97% of people who try to breach that wall repeatedly are able to do so. Walls, despite what Mr. Trump will tell you, are not effective. All they do is they seal people in who are already here. A decade ago, half of the Mexicans went home within a year. They want to go home and see their families. Today, because it's harder to get in and the smuggling rates have gone up as a result, only a quarter go home, less than a quarter go home within a year. So they come here and stay. And knowing that they're going to stay, they tend to bring their friends and family members more quickly to the United States. That's not been very productive. What about the second thing, guest worker programs? Well, guest workers are supposed to come temporarily and then go home. But during the biggest one, the Bracero program, they came and more than half of them stayed. And that became the foundation of the wave of migration that followed from Mexico. So you got to at least figure out a way to get people to go home like they're supposed to. And what about the third thing that we've tried, legalization? And that would be great for people who are living in enormous fear in recent years. We have lived through a period of greatest hostility towards immigrants since the Great Depression, and an enormous slew of laws against them, and chasing after them by sheriffs here in North Carolina and handing them over to immigration authorities. But when we last allowed people to come out of the shadows in 1986, we had an amnesty. We went from 3 million to 1 million. Then those who legalized invited their friends and family members, come on up illegally, and this is what's happened. We're now at 12 million. I suck at math, but even I can tell you that did not work out as our political leaders swore to us that it would. Instead, I think that Americans should push our government to formulate a foreign policy that brings every tool that we have at our disposal to trying to improve these four countries that are sending 3/4 of the migrants that are coming to this country unlawfully. I think that we can do things like some of these things, and maybe I can talk about some of these in our Q&A, to strengthen these very weak governments in these places, to cleanse government institutions like the police and the judicial system, improve governance, economic development, reduce corruption, and reduce violence in these poor countries. I think spending money on this stuff instead of the $2.5 billion we spent on that useless fence, or the $1 billion we gave Boeing for a virtual fence that never worked, is a much more effective way to spend my money. This is actually doable. We've seen creative approaches in Honduras start to move the needle and reduce homicides by 27% in just 2 years. Let me end by saying, you know, when I listen to these kids' stories, these children's stories, as I was 5 weeks ago in Mexico, there's so much that I want to ask all of you here, every American, to be an advocate for. Something being debated right now in Congress is a tripling of foreign aid to these 3 countries in Central America to $1 billion. I have a letter you can write to your congressional leader on my website if you agree that this might be a radically different, more effective approach. I think that we need to push for a different and actually effective approach to our drug problem in this country. We've tried just say no and lock them all up, and this seems to be the one issue that Democrats and Republicans actually agree on. This has not worked. It's been a complete and utter failure. Perhaps we can try things like drug treatment, drug prevention, and God forbid, and this is something I've come to quite recently, maybe legalization of everything, like Portugal has done. For the first 5 years, it's a mess. Drug use goes up, robberies go up, but as these programs kick in, like drug treatment, things get better. And maybe we can learn something from other countries who have tried different approaches. I think we should perhaps lobby to increase the number of refugees that we take in the United States. We take 70,000. We used to take 130,000 pre-9/11. Can we increase it to that level to allow some of these kids to have a safe harbor in this country. That dinky country in Europe, Germany, will take in more than 10 times the number of refugees that we will take in just this year. And finally, I wish everyone would join me as a voice for refugee children. To me, it seems a little ridiculous to have to say it, but if a child is in danger and they're actually knocking at your door, I think we should open that door. Somehow we can get a law passed through Congress that ensures that 34,000 deportable migrants, they're locked up every night in our prison system, which obviously has been a boon to the prison industry. They're good at lobbying for stuff. But recently, a laudable Obama measure that would have given $50 million for lawyers for these kids to represent them in court, shot down by the Senate. I think we should change this because get these kids legal help, because honestly, our current system, it just makes a mockery of our judicial system. I see this as a moment, a true test for our great country. Are we going to rise to the level of humanity that is required of us? I have seen students rise to that level all over this country. I've seen, after reading my book, as you all have here, they've gone to my website, there's a whole how to help section. There's no shortage of ideas there. And they've done great things. They've built schools in Central America, water systems. A high school raised $9,000 selling cookies and provided it as a microloan to women in Guatemala who grew coffee, wanted to expand that business and provide more jobs for women so those women wouldn't have to leave their children. I know that here in the U.S. we are capable of great things if we come together with a purpose. And I'll end by saying I saw it on a recent night in McAllen, Texas, on the border. Members of the Sacred Heart Catholic Church, they saw these dirty, scared women and toddlers. They were at this local bus station nearby, and they had just been released by our Border Patrol to take buses to their destinations and ultimately go to immigration court, see if they can stay legally or not in the United States. And they started bringing them back to this church, which you can see, it became this impromptu relief center. Jews, Episcopalians, Baptists, they all came together to help. Volunteers from 28 states in our great union converged on this church. Like the parents from Pennsylvania with 8 10-year-old boys, packed them in a van with donations, drove to the tip of Texas. And these volunteers, they all said the same thing when they arrived. I was moved, and so I came. The women walked in that night. They were terrified. Many have been raped on this journey north. They had been held in hieleras. They're these ice-cold jail cells Border Patrol uses to hold people for 5 days. They had been sleeping on the concrete floor, no shower, not enough food. There was a 3-day-old baby sleeping on that floor. And when they walked in, these women and their toddlers, the volunteers all yelled out, "Bienvenidos," welcome. And all the women started crying, because it was the first time anyone in this country had said something kind to them. Sister Norma, the righteous nun who runs this place, went to Washington, D.C. I hear she was on Good Morning America the other day, and she went and told House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, we are not doing anything political here. We are extending a hand, one human being to another. So I'm here tonight to ask, here in North Carolina, where this story ends, can't we all extend a hand in some small or larger way? If you have a tortilla, will you consider giving half of it away? If a girl like me, I couldn't even write a paper when I got to college, you may be in the same situation, could win, of all things, the Pulitzer Prize in feature writing. If Enrique could make it to his mom in North Carolina, if these people who have so little can give a little away, I know that anything is possible. I know that if we push with the determination, the ganas that I saw on top of that train, we can help these refugee children actually get some of the justice they deserve in this country. And we can bring about a new, radically different approach to our immigration dilemma to slowly, surely change things in Central America. So mothers like my house cleaner, and maybe yours, they never have to leave their children again. Thank you.